Hello, friends. We're back with episode 159 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. We've hit the month of April already. It's hard to believe, but yeah, we got another awesome set of content ready for you. And this is the show where we put a spotlight on the weekly highlights that appear in this week's Our Weekly issue. My name is iamYannC, and I'm delighted you joined us from wherever you are around the world. And I'm never doing this alone these days. I am joined at the virtual hip here by my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, Eric. Can't complain here, but pay and support your open source maintainers, right?
Yes.
A tough week
yes.
for some folks.
It was a tough week out there, man. A tough week. You probably have heard about this if you're anywhere involved in the tech sector, but the XZ compression library project had a little bit of a mishap with, well, we won't belabor the point too much, but a combination of kind of like social engineering.
Pretty incredible social engineering. I mean, not a little one-off, this pretty sophisticated effort.
Yeah, it was sophisticated all around. And for those that want to know more and want to kind of hear like a take that's very balanced and very comprehensive, I'll put a link in the show notes to the latest Linux Unplugged podcast from my friend Chris Fisher at Jupiter Broadcasting and Company. They did an awesome deep dive into it, everything you need to know and where it might mean in the future. So, yep, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Luckily, we have no social engineering of the bad variety here on this show. We're going to get right to it here. And our curator this week is a longtime member of the Our Weekly team, Ryo Nakakawara, who has put together a very awesome issue for us. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your various pull requests and suggestions. So remember, Mike, it was not too long ago in previous episodes we were talking about a little spring cleaning might be in order for some of your like package code or other data science projects. Well, we're going to take that up a notch because there was a key aspect that may have been left out in that discussion. For those that have been watching this space quite a bit, especially around, tidying up your code, there was a very famous, now very almost legendary talk by Jenny Bryan over at a previous RStudio conference when she gave a presentation about workflows and managing your environments and such. And yeah, she has a little snippet in there that if she spotted a certain line that has to do with removing all of your objects in your workspace right off the bat at the top of your script, she would probably come to your place of residence and turn up the temperature a little bit, so to speak. Well, that's one way of doing it. But we all can agree that Jenny's got a point there because that's a lot of manual effort to put that line of code in there every time. Copy, paste, come on, no one has time for that. Why not make this a bit easier? Well, that's where Matt Dre, who's been a frequent contributor to the highlights, has got a solution for us in his latest blog post. Because get this, folks, why run that manually in every script where, instead of that, you could put a nice little snippet in your .rprofile file. And for those that don't know, the .rprofile is where you can add a little bit of customization to make, something to automatic, you might say, at the startup of your R session. Well, he uses a clever function called setHook, which, admittedly, I didn't know about this until the post, that comes within base R, and ties that with the RStudio API, which is a package by Posit to let you interface with the IDE programmatically. Another nice little feature there. And in this body of the function, you know what? We need to keep an eye on that environment regularly. How regularly? Why not wipe out your R environment every 30 seconds because you don't need all those pesky objects in there because that's just going to pollute things. And again, you avoid that manual effort of copy-paste. What could possibly go wrong? A lot, apparently. And if you haven't guessed by now, yes, this was an April Fool's post. But with a little clever hack in there nonetheless, because I had no idea that we could do something like this, be even possible. But, your results may vary if you actually want to try this in your day-to-day work because maybe you might lose everything in 30 seconds. So, to each their own. But hey, I had a lot of fun reading this, and might be a good prank to play on somebody down the road. Hashtag just saying.
Yeah, this was a good one, and I was thinking the same thing that Matt posts here. He goes, "I know what you're thinking. Doesn't this block the console?" And I know whenever I restart R, right, I have to wait for a few seconds for everything to sort of boot back up, and for me to be able to start programming again, and having to do my development within the confines of a 30-second window until that happens again was like terribly scary to think about, until I realized what day it was. And this blog post became a lot more lighthearted after that. But it's a great homage to Jenny Bryan's workflows presentation that she gave that I still come back to. I still see a lot of code out there in the wild. It's crazy with that RM list equals ls call at the beginning of it, and I do try to continue to forward Jenny's slide presentation to those folks to try to tell them about some of these best practices that we all know and have come to love around managing your projects and workflows and things like that. But this was a nice touch to remind myself about that blog post from Matt Trey. So thanks to him for this one.
Yeah, this is very entertaining on many levels here, and somewhat unironically, at the day job, we do often have to restart our R session because of technical mishaps. So it's a cool way to see how to do this doing the point-click method, if nothing else. I just may not do it every 30 seconds, but
Yeah, this would be a terrible prank to play on your coworker if you got access to their laptop and edited their R profile file. I had a coworker one time that set my lock screen on my computer to an image of the blue screen of death. So I came back to my computer all the time and thought that it was getting rebooted. But that was a good one. Got to admit.
That's probably some of my college roommates would have done to mine. They knew that at the time I didn't know Linux very well, and they were like Linux wizards. And this is before I was still on Windows for my dorm computer, and they did things like open and close my CD tray and all this other nonsense, and I'm like, how did you do that? And I didn't know any better, but now what I know now, I could wreak havoc on them. But we all learn the hard way, don't we?
That's right.
But we don't have to learn the hard way, so to speak. We're going to, do some actual useful data science for our second highlight here because, as you see opportunities in your day-to-day work to leverage things like automation, reusing your functional programming skills and whatnot, you can extend this in many different ways. And our next highlight extends this to, frankly, some maintenance that happens in our personal lives day to day. And this is a very insightful post here. And this next highlight is coming from Brendan Smith, who is a research assistant at Michigan State University. Hey, that's not too far from my roots back when growing up. And he talks about, having to do with the day-to-day life of being a graduate researcher and trying to find a way to simplify a, necessary situation of living in a apartment with roommates, and somebody's got to pay the bills, and it looks like they're all sharing them equally with him and his roommates. But there's got to be a way to get a friendly reminder of just how much everybody owes per month for those various utilities, electric, water, internet, etc., etc. So what could he use with the skills that he has to make this a bit easier? Well, came up with a little plan here that leverages R at the core of it to figure out a way to document or track the monthly expenses and the amount needed for each of everybody in the apartment to pay, and then writing, guess what, an R script to pull that data in and be able to send a custom text message to everybody at a certain day per month with the amount that they owe for the various share of the bills. So let's dive into this a bit further, shall we? So the first task is, of course, finding a place to track all this. And Brendan wishes there was a more automated way of doing it, but what I've seen in the community happen quite a bit is somebody will spin up a Google spreadsheet and then have that ready to go, because guess what? There are packages in the R ecosystem to import that into R itself via the Google Sheets for R or Google Sheets 4 package. And with a little dplyr and tidyverse magic, Brendan is able to assemble a tidy data frame that has for each month the type of bill as a variable, the amount, and the due date for that particular amount. So again, very nice tidy way of representing all that so that we can do something with it afterwards, doing a little summarization at the end to figure out, okay, now what is the share for each user of that total, and then when should they be notified of it. So again, very nice set of code here in the blog post, very straightforward to follow, and that's one piece of the pie. Now, the other piece, of course, is actually sending that message, and that's where first they got to craft what the message will look like, and this is a nice little hybrid of a few paste functions and string splitting and whatnot. Lots of different ways to tackle that, but in the end, taking that tidy data set of the amount that someone owes for each of the types of bills, he's able to print out a friendly message that looks like somebody wrote it by hand with the total amount, a third of that total, and the actual breakdown of all of those amounts. But that's great to have that ready, but we're in this age of so much on our minds, we need a reminder of that. So the last step, Mike, is got to actually get that message out there, don't we?
Yes, we do, which is pretty cool. So the way that Brendan goes about doing this is through really this sort of system, command line call. And he's taken this approach from a Stack Overflow post that's linked here in the blog. And interestingly, the way that he sends this message, the methodology is only for iMessage devices. I've seen, quite a few similar automated text message sort of programs like this. I believe Twilio. I don't know if you ever heard of that, Eric, before.
I sure have, yeah.
But that's a service I believe that's out there. I'm guessing that there's an R client for it. There definitely is a Python package for interfacing with Twilio. I have a friend who did something very similar to give him the sale prices for steaks every week or something like that for his family. Yeah, nice. Hey, we nerd out wherever we want to nerd out, right? And but the approach that Brendan takes here to leverage this for iMessage as opposed to, I believe, Twilio would be more geared towards like SMS messages, I think is really interesting. The fact that we have this sort of other option here. It's actually a fairly small system call here that I guess he calls it an Apple script is what he's writing here in terms of the code. And it's pretty easy. He has it within a for loop that messages each one of his buddies. That's literally the variable name that he uses in his script to tell them, this really nice, to text them with this really nice breakdown of the monthly bill, the total, their third, and then the breakdown between gas, water, and internet. So it's, a pretty straightforward process, but really cool to see, something very practical like this in action. And the last thing that he does to be able to automate this process is he schedules a cron job, creates a cron job to be able to run this essentially on the first of every month at 9 a.m. There's a couple little small pieces of code that he has to add to his R script, as well as develop the cron job, and being able to save a particular command in his .zshrc file. And then he talks about some other considerations, and this is where we can certainly nerd out further, Eric. But he runs this on his local machine on the first of every month at 9 a.m. So he actually has on his Mac in his system preferences, you have the ability, I'm guessing through the UI, to schedule his computer to wake up at 9 a.m. for about 5 minutes on the first of every month, which is, that's one way to do it. That's pretty interesting. We try to leverage a lot of times for automated stuff like this so that our laptop doesn't have to be up and running. Things like GitHub Actions or AWS Lambda functions, or things like that. So, another potential methodology out there for scheduling these types of automated jobs. But again, it's really, I love blog posts like this because they're so applicable to, you know, a real life scenario and solving a use case for, you know, a problem that you face. And I think that's a lot of times the best way that we learn. And I think these blog posts go a long way towards, you know, educating others and making this stuff a lot more tangible, digestible than some of the stuff that's more in the weeds. So hats off to Brendan for this. This is a great post.
Yeah, we can relate to this on many different levels here, and certainly I'm one of those people who likes to try to R all the things, as I say, and this is another great showcase of that. One thing that, on top of maybe even supercharging this workflow, like I said, my great callback to using something like GitHub Actions so that your computer isn't the point of driving all this. And another idea is that if you want something a little more agnostic than like the Apple iMessage, you know, paradigm for sending these messages. I remember reading about this years ago, but there is a great service called Pushbullet that apparently is a neat way through an API to send notifications across all your different systems, whether they're actual computers, servers, or, yes, mobile devices. And so guess what? There's an R package for that as well. Dirk Edebutel has released the R Pushbullet package, which could easily be plugged into something like this, so that then for each of those devices that, say, Brendan's roommates who installed this Pushbullet app on their phone, because I believe it's a iOS and Android app as well as a service online, they could get these messages without even going through Apple Message as well. So again, all just food for thought here, but it just opens the possibilities of, you know, I know of all people that sometimes these technologies that we depend on are here in our houses or even in our server rooms can be susceptible to who knows what. So having the cloud do stuff can always be a nice little security blanket too.
Definitely. No, that Pushbullet service sounds really interesting. It reminds me of a great Office episode where Ryan invents a technology called Woof, where I think when you send a message, it like, you know, texts you, emails you, calls your phone, it prints something out in the printer, sends you a fax. It hits you everywhere.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to be hit everywhere or knowing I have to pay money to a certain person, but hey, you know what? To each their own.
That's right.
For our last highlight here, we're going to go a little bit to our statistical roots here because we have an insightful post that's leveraging a technique that I frankly use day to day in my daily work as part of my responsibilities and my day job to show you how you can not only use this technique to investigate, you know, optimal values of a certain parameter in statistics, but also investigate just, is that test really doing what it says it does? And when I mean test, I mean like a hypothesis or inference test. And our last highlight here comes from the esteemed Frank Harrell, who is a professor of biostatistics at Vanderbilt University, longtime member of the R community, been one of the founding fathers of many statistical workflows in R. And of course, I have fond memories of my very early days of R using his HMIS package, which accompanies many of his textbooks that I think I still have 2 or 3 of on my bookshelf in the basement from my grad school days. But Frank comes to us of his latest blog post on an investigation of a very fundamental statistic that's often used in the inference methods of what we call survival model analysis. And for those that don't know what survival analysis and time to event models really mean, these are the typical distributions one might use when we look at the time, we're modeling the time to a certain key event. In my line of work, this is often used in our oncology clinical trials, when we're looking at the time to an unfortunate, say, death or recurrence of cancer in patients. But this method also has great tie-ins to financial analysis and many other sectors as well. So it doesn't have to be that event of a bad connotation. It can be any particular event. And often when we look at these, when we compare different groups, we are leveraging certain statistics, such as what's called the log rank chi-square test, as well to look at any differences between the groups in what we call their curves of the time to event. What Frank hypothesizes here is that, yes, the long rank test is very applicable, and it does assume something called non-parametric assumptions, meaning that it actually isn't trying to assume that your survival distribution is following a standard type of distribution that you might see in the statistical, literature. Instead, we don't know what that distribution is. So it's saying that the log rank test is great for those situations. Well, there's always been a bit of a, conception that the log rank test and some other statistics that are from what's called a Cox regression model, which is often used when you're comparing, say, two or more groups of, say, people or other types of grouping, but with additional covariates involved. Maybe it's like gender, maybe it's age, maybe it's some other factors. That's where these Cox regression models come into play. But many would say that those don't really work as well for this assumption as the log rank test, especially in the sense that the log rank test is also making more strict assumptions. Well, what Frank does in this post is investigate, maybe those other statistics can work just as well as a log rank test in these situations after all, that were hypothesized not to work as well. So what do you do in these situations? There are many ways to tackle this, but Frank starts off with, simulating data sets. That's what I do almost every day. And with survival analysis, he's cooked up a very, quick function to do this and to also compute different inference statistics, such as the chi-square statistic, as well as these other ones that he's comparing against that we'll get to later on in the post, such as the Cox score test, as well as some others. So we always look at, doing a lot of simulations for this, because maybe by chance you see a data set that shows that these statistics were wildly different, but you want to see just how much this happens across a range of simulations. So he simulates, I believe, 10,000 sets. And guess what? Because these are pretty standard types of simulations, in R, this only takes about 6 seconds. Oh, I'm jealous. I wish some of my simulations would take that short, but we don't often get the luxury of simulating some of these, more fundamental distributions. But in any event, the first assessment to see if this chi-squared statistic agrees or disagrees with some of these other ones is to do a nice little line plot to put on the x-axis, the log rank test, versus on the y-axis, the Cox log rank or likelihood ratio log rank test. And you can see in this nice plot here, I'm actually going to take some ideas from this later on, is that the points are colored by how frequent they agree. And you can see there's a line, diagonal line in the post going from, the values being equal. Most of the simulations are on this line or very close to it, indicating that this first pass, the likelihood ratio log rank test and the likelihood ratio Cox test are in agreement here. But that's not all we can look at here. Another fundamental method in this space would be looking at correlation between the ratio of these statistics. So if you take one and divide the other, first, is that ratio going to be close to 1 or not, meaning that they're very similar, and just how much in agreement they are. Next visualization here, again, is a nice histogram where you see many of those points are right at the 1 mark, and very nice, long tails afterwards, but most of that frequency is right there at the full agreement. Again, 2 of 2 so far. And then now the next part is looking at, well, there are other estimates that we can take in these models, such as the hazard ratio, another fundamental parameter. We start to look at what's the practical meaning of the differences between these groups per se. And again, looking at these estimates, doing a similar line plot as we saw in the first example, close to full agreement on that line between the hazard ratio of the long rank test and the hazard ratio of the Cox long rank hazard ratio. Now we're 3 through 3 so far, and these simulations showing a lot of agreement so far. Now that was with, experimental designs with 40 patients in total. He decided to see if this trend continues with more patients. Intuition and statistics would say that as your sample size increases with these properties, you're going to get even more agreement with this. But it never hurts to check, right? So a very similar set of visuals with respect to the frequency of the agreement of these statistics. We see once again, they are right near at the top of the 1.0 cutoff. They're all very much in agreement. So what is the takeaway message here? The takeaway message here, in Frank's opinion, is that because there is such agreement here, that the Cox version of these statistics could also be just as easy or just as important to leverage in situations where you might have comparisons of these two groups, but that it is violating maybe certain assumptions of that default, you might say, log rank statistic that is a little more stringent on his assumptions versus the Cox regression statistics actually do have a little more leniency with respect to within these groups of variation. So this might be something you want to look at if you're doing this method and doing comparisons of these methods in your daily work, especially in the realm of time to event analysis. But I think the other takeaway here is that Frank, with his brilliant statistics knowledge, is again showing a technique that you can use in almost any type of statistical investigation. If we don't know the true answer, let's mimic what would happen in the real world situation, and let's simulate this a boatload of times and just see what these properties really converge to. So again, for me personally in my daily work, this really resonated with me as another thing I can put in my toolbox as I consult with teams on these type of methods. But again, the blog post is very straight to the point, lots of code snippets throughout, and the visuals are definitely something I'm going to take in my daily work as we look at the results of simulations down the road.
Yeah, Eric, I couldn't agree more. I think this is a fantastic way to, really argue, I guess, in a way for Frank's point here. And doing these data visualizations to sort of these small scale simulations and these data visualizations to hammer home that point and support his argument here, really drive home how correct he is, I guess. So I think it's fantastic. I don't think there's any better way to go about proving some theory that you have or proving some statistical property than running that little simulation, creating a toy data set that others can run themselves and see the results. And he's obviously built a beautiful blog post around this as well that allows us to be able to walk through that analysis and see this firsthand. So that's fantastic. It looks like it's probably stood up with Quarto, and we have the collapsible code chunks that we can open and close if we want to see exactly how he did what he did. But it's a great, a fantastic blog post, and I would recommend perhaps reading the summary first in this blog post, because I think it gives a great sort of lay of the land about exactly sort of what this fallacy is and how he believes and proves that both of these tests essentially are equivalent for the most part. And I would totally agree with you as well that survival analysis is definitely not limited to just the life sciences space. We use a lot of survival analysis as well in the financial services industry to try to predict the time until maybe a default will take place, or the time until someone will actually make a prepayment on their mortgage or something like that. So these survival models are fantastic, I think, for a lot of different use cases. I remember listening to a podcast, I think, with Alan Downey, and they were asking him, what would one recommendation he would have for a burgeoning statistics student, and he said learn survival analysis. That was his number one recommendation, and it's something that you're not going to be taught in an introductory stats course, but once you actually get on the ground in industry, it just has applications everywhere. He talked about how long a marriage lasts, all sorts of different things that you can use to survival analysis against. I think we have some new functionality for survival analysis within the Tidy Models ecosystem, which is awesome. So no excuse not to kick the tires on that.
Yeah, and also just, again, huge appreciation for me to Frank as one of these biggest, key thought leaders in this space, but also this Frank is very progressive in how he tools his tooling here, both in his teaching and the materials he releases. Because my goodness, this website's fantastic. So this blog post is coming from his site called Statistical Thinking. It's just chock full of his like coursework, his previous talks, and again, it's definitely a Quartal, and it looks fantastic. So kudos to Frank for really pushing the envelope here in terms of this isn't some random like department stats webpage on some antiquated web technology. This is a very accessible and very nicely structured site. So he's got many different posts here. Even just scanning his index here, even got a nice little multiplicity analysis on Bayesian designs and soccer. Like there's all sorts of things that he pursues here. So Frank, yeah, kudos to you. Awesome post, and really learned a lot. Learned a lot reading through this, like I always learn from you. But you can learn just as much, if not more, even with the rest of the R Weekly issue here. And Rio's done a tremendous job here. And we'll take a few minutes to talk about our additional finds. And yeah, my friendly co-host here teased this a couple weeks back that he was knee deep in this rabbit hole. And you stay true to your word, Mike. You have now released a GitHub repository of how you were able to create PDF reports in Quartal in those fancy dev containers. So why don't you talk us through just your journey for all this?
Sure. Yeah, it was quite a journey to put this together. It was probably like a month of troubleshooting and trying to figure this out. I had some issues locally with my Quarto install on my machine where I had some funky stuff going on when I was trying to knit these and render these pretty massive Quarto reports to PDF. And I think that once you start introducing LaTeX and things like that, things can go awry. We know. I think Quarto probably plays best with HTML output. I would love to be able to only produce HTML output, but unfortunately, to pay the bills, sometimes we have to render to PDF because that's what some folks want, and that's okay. But some things can kind of go haywire, and I think there were some issues with maybe it's hard when you're doing work locally, truly locally on your local machine, to really understand everything that's installed on your machine and all of the things that could be affected by what is installed on your machine. So being able to have sort of this clean environment, leveraging Docker essentially and VS Code dev containers allows us to really get our arms around exactly what the environment looks like from an operating system and software dependency standpoint. And the new technology around VS Code dev containers is phenomenal because it allows us to do our development work within a Docker container without really feeling like you're in a Docker container. It feels like you're in your local environment, essentially. And it's huge for us for collaboration because this way I can ensure that the work that I'm doing is within this environment, that one of my teammates can clone the repository themselves. They can spin up this dev container, and they are operating within that exact same environment that I'm operating in, and we're not affected by all those little different things in the background that are installed on our own PCs. I think it's really, really powerful. I've created this template, a few days ago and probably used it like 4 times since. So it's serving to be very useful for me so far. One of the probably trickiest things was to be able to leverage Windows fonts so that when, I author this PDF report, that it doesn't come out with some of these, not to throw shade at anybody, but some of these Ubuntu, system fonts are a little less pleasing to the eye, especially with what we're going to give, an end audience than what you might get in your package of Windows fonts or I guess even Google fonts nowadays. But folks are sort of used to their Arial fonts and their Times New Roman fonts. So being able to install those on this Ubuntu machine this Ubuntu Docker image was a little less trivial than I was hoping it would be, but we got there. and trying to add some extensions like a native PDF viewer within VS Code, which there's a phenomenal extension for that allows you to click on a PDF file and it gives you this PDF viewer right within VS Code. So little stuff like that I think goes a long way towards making your development environment, if you are authoring Quarto reports, and rendering those Quarto reports to PDF, hopefully make your life a little easier. So if that sounds like you, feel free to check it out, submit a pull request or open an issue and let us know if you're able to kick the tires on it and if you found it useful.
Awesome. Well, I really resonate with the journey you had there. And I'm also in the situation where I'm developing both an HTML and a PDF version of a document, a very important one nonetheless for our consortium pilot submission, where I'm trying to push the envelope a little bit here too, with having a GitHub action that of course is using a container under the hood to compile these as separate formats and route them to different places depending on the format. So I'm in the rabbit hole too. Maybe I'll make a post about that in the future.
Well, shout out to Isabella Velasquez, because on Mastodon she pushed me and asked me to write a blog post on dev containers and VS Code for Quarto. I punted a little bit and created the GitHub repository, the public GitHub repository instead. But I will counter and say that I think that's going to be more useful than a blog post and having to put it all together yourself. You can just clone the repo. There's a pretty nice README in there, and you can get started a little quicker that way. But shout out to Isabella.
Yeah, absolutely. Great real nudge there. So, Mike, I took your softball here, but what else did you find?
Sure. No, thank you. ShinyConf is coming up this month, which is very exciting, and there is a great post by Joanna from the Absalon team on navigating ShinyConf 2024, a first-time user's guide to virtual conferences. If you're not somebody that participates or has participated in a virtual conference before, it can sort of be tricky sometimes to navigate where to go, what time things are spinning up. When I log into a session, can people see me? Can people hear me? Or am I sort of hidden behind the scenes? So I think that she's provided some great resources in here to help you be able to navigate ShinyConf 2024, which is coming up quickly, and I think we're all super excited for. And I'll throw a second one out there really quick, just because I think it's fantastic. There's an interview on the R Consortium blog with Angie Reed, who's a water resources planner for the Penobscot Indian Nation. And I think sort of this story about how Penobscot Indian Nation leverages R and I think some Posit products as well has been covered by Posit as well in some videos. So maybe we can add some links to that. But it's a fantastic story about how they're leveraging R, I believe Shiny, a lot of data visualization around things like water quality mapping to really try to improve the situations within their Indian nation. So fantastic interview and walkthrough here. There's a lot of nice hyperlinks that can take you down all sorts of different rabbit holes. A lot of great pictures that are showing you sort of firsthand how their work with R is propagating and helping their people. And it's a great interview and read through. So I'd recommend folks to check it out.
Yeah, absolutely inspiring. And I remember, hearing about that at PositCon. I was like, this is what data science is all about. Being able to, with such a helpful cause, and being able to leverage the tooling to our advantage to fill this real big need. Yeah, really, really awesome call out. And of course, there's much more than just that. But of course, we can't banter forever here. But we will invite you to check out the rest of the issue at rwiki.org. It's all right there at the front page. And also, tremendous job by Rio, as always, to curate this issue. And, of course, we love to hear from you as well. The RWiki project itself definitely loves hearing from you in terms of your pull requests for a new blog post, new package you discovered, new resource out there. Yeah, the full gamut's available. We're just a pull request away. It's all right there at the top right corner. Click that. You'll be automatically taken to the pull request interface where it's all marked down all the time. You can write markdown, you can give us a pull request. So we love to hear from you. And of course, we love hearing from you for this show as well. I will be honest, we are in the midst of a little moving, so to speak, to a new podcast hosting provider. And hopefully you won't notice. That's the success in any IT migration, right? Is that if you don't notice anything, we did our job. So we'll find out, I guess, later on. But nonetheless, we do have a link to our contact page in the show notes. And also, we love to, if you have one of those modern podcast apps like Podverse, Fountain, Cast-O-Matic, Curiocaster, and whatnot, you can send us a little boost along the way as well. And lastly, we are available on these various social medias. I am mostly on Mastodon these days with @rpodcast at podcastindex.social. I am also sporadically on X or Twitter, whatever you want to still call it, @the_rcast, but also mostly on LinkedIn as well with time to time with updates on the show. And yes, I will be sending out more posts about the Shiny Conference coming up. So, Mike, where can listeners find you?
Sure, on Mastodon at Mike_Thomas at Fosstodon.org, or on LinkedIn if you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. You can check out what we are up to lately. And quick shout out to Roland Schmidt on Mastodon, who had a long drive to make, I think, this past weekend, and binge listened to 6 episodes of the podcast. So thanks for putting up with us for that amount of time, but I'm glad that he enjoyed it, and I hope we made his drive a little quicker.
Yeah, much respect. That was really fun to read, and hey, I remember those long road trips, and unfortunately with my kids in the back now, I don't usually get to listen to all the tech stuff anymore like I used to, but when I was commuting back and forth from Michigan to Indiana, I would put on a whole bunch of podcasts to make that 5.5-hour drive quite a bit easier. So thank you so much. That warmed our hearts, as they say. So, well, with that, we're going to close up shop here before we have any more shenanigans here. But as always, we thank you so much for listening to us from wherever you are. And we hope to see you back here for a new episode of our Weekly Highlights next week.